All right, and so finally, to give us the perspective of the patient and advocacy community, who better to do that than Ellen Sigal, the founder and chairperson of Friends of Cancer Research. Ellen?
Good morning. So I shouldn't believe everything I read in the press about real-world evidence being reckless? No? Okay, well, that's good. Thank you, Janet. So this won't be a surprise to anyone about how long it takes and the complexities of getting a drug to the market. This is a slide I'm sure you've seen over and over and over again. It's a huge problem, and I believe it has to change and will change. It's a lot easier to figure out what needs to be done, but some of the limitations are just basic science. The science is evolving, and we don't know all the answers. So that clearly is one of the major issues that we're facing. But there's more than that. We have an inefficient system. We have silos. We have companies that work and don't share information. We have academics that don't share information. We don't even share information among ourselves. So that is something that really has to change. We have patients who are urgently wanting access to these new and novel drugs, and that creates its own form of complexity, and there are, right to try laws on that, but there is an urgency, particularly with the patient with a fatal disease. There's a lack, I've talked about the lack of sharing data, but there's also a lack of emerging data and different criteria, the RESIST criteria. Immunotherapy, it's a new world, and we can't rely on old standards. And the lack of public understanding on the complexity of what we're facing. People believe the headlines, and that creates a lot of expectations. The regulatory agency is too fast or too slow or never just right. And that makes it very hard to deal with. And also the pricing issues. This has become a very big talking point, and it's legitimate and it's something we have to deal with, but it's also very complex because the entire ecosystem is broken, and that's another issue that we have to deal with. But that's some of the background. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the innovative trial designs, but not too much because others have said more than I can and in a better way, but I am going to spend some time on public policy. So the innovative trial designs we've talked about, and that's really starting to emerge, and it really is going to make a huge difference in seamless drug development, and it's really leading the way in how we really need to think about these multiple sites, this adaptive trial design, and LungMap is one that obviously we have a lot of experience with, and that was complex. The idea actually came from the FDA. And it came at one of our friends Brookings meetings years ago, and it was really a novel idea to have a genomic trial and to have it at multiple sites. And it was really, in many ways, easy to come up with. From concept to execution, it was less than a year, maybe 9-10 months. The FDA played a major role. The NCI was very important, the cooperative groups. But it was challenging. When you do a public-private partnership and you look at existing systems, and you've never done this before with multiple partners, we did this through the foundation of the NIH, it creates not only complex infrastructure issues, but it also creates cultural issues. It's a partnership, and people are interested, or they like partnerships, and they like the idea of it, but it means behavior has to change, and it has to change on all sides. It has to be driven by the patients. It has to create flexibility from the NCI, from the companies, and from the cooperative groups, and it has to be a different way of doing business. I think we're getting there, and it's much better, and I actually feel very strongly that the new phase that we're going to start into, which will be IO combinations, and we're going to be adding ADNO. It's a little bit early, but we're hoping to make these changes in the next few months. And the good news is we have this in over 500 sites We have it in community settings, which are really making a huge difference. And we have it in Canada. Canada took a long time. It's not saving us yet, but ultimately that's going to be very important. So that's a new model. And it also creates the ability for patients who normally don't get these trials, particularly these interesting immunotherapy trials and these biomarker trials where there are very small patient populations, to really get exposed to these agents which are not normal in a community setting. So I'm very pleased about where that's going, but it still takes some time. The I-SPY decided that was Laura Esselman's trial, and that's an adaptive design, and that's going very well, and they're starting to really that was not started as registration intent, but it's certainly really an area that's creating some very, very interesting pathways, and is continuing. This glioblastoma trial is starting to get off. That's a new way of doing things. Multiple myeloma is doing something, pancreatic. So I think this idea of these master protocols is really evolving and very important. I want to spend a few minutes on this that Janet touched on, and we're very pleased that this is happening, this oncology office at the FDA. It seems the center of excellence. It seemed kind of obvious to us early on that this should happen, and it was one of the opportunities through PDUFA and through the moonshot and through the Cures bill, which of course was passed and will be signed tomorrow. But it wasn't necessarily intuitively easy at the FDA. You can imagine, because for some very legitimate reasons, people have very deep expertise in CBER and CDRH in their topic. On the other hand, this issue of clinical expertise, real-world evidence, and the idea of the real-world history of a patient is also very important. So we were able, through a fair amount of negotiation and a lot of back and forth, get this done, and we are extremely happy about that. And right now, Rick Pazdur is the acting director of that. Hopefully, he will be the director of that. The good news is that it will integrate the expertise of all these divisions and all these people that are working hard on it, and there will be clinical sign-off by the oncologists who are making these decisions, who really have the expertise on it. And the other good news part of it is actually will be funded. There's money in the moonshot, and there's money that will be going to it. It will start with $15 million a year, so they will have the ability to have a recruit, retain, and to really get patient input and really interactions with the entire community that they're working with. So I think this is really something that we have to look forward to, and I'm really pleased, because I think if we had not gotten the Cures bill passed, it would have been an unfunded mandate. So now that we have some resources, it will happen. So this is really important. The validation of common tools are really important. We talk a lot of PROs and about the patient experience and what's important to the patient and how the patient feels. Of course, the patients want efficacy. There is no question about it. But they also want quality of life, and they actually want to know what that means, and they want to have real-world data. And we have been working very closely with the companies and with the FDA on it. And up till very recently, there were really not validated tools on this. Now we have the Pro-CTE from NCI that they've worked in very carefully, and we want this incorporated. Up till now, there was a lot of discussion, but no really hard data. We think very strongly there has to be label indications, and I think essentially that's going to move the field a lot. I think when you are a patient and you're making decisions, or a physician making decisions on treatments which are relatively equivalent, the real-world data, the issue of quality of life will matter a lot, and I think this has to become very serious. And I really want to thank the NCI for their work on this, because now we have a tool that's very important. The exploratory randomized trials, I think, was talked about. That's very important. We need to know This needs to be seamless, and this is pre-specifying thresholds and plans to expand the patient cohort when unanticipated is important. We're going to really be working on this as well in our new phase of and I'm sure Mary Redmond will talk about that a little bit for the lung map. Public policy is important. We've talked a little bit about it, but breakthrough was really an idea that came from the FDA. It was something that Janet Woodcock and Rick Pastor asked us to look at one of our meetings, and I have to tell you that it was one of the most dysfunctional panels we ever had. It took a very long time to get consensus, particularly working with the statisticians and trying to figure out how that could work. And it was kind of all over the place. And somehow we wound up with a recommendation. And last time when we did PDUFA, we thought this would be something that would be actually excellent for PDUFA. And when we worked with FDA and we worked with Congress on it, we thought that there would be maybe 1 or 2 drugs a year, maybe. And of course, this was not done specifically for cancer, and it really has changed the way we do work and the way we think. Not only has it been incredibly successful, but it's changed culture. It's changed culture within the agency. It's changed culture within the developers, within the academic community. It's a way of doing trials that are really different, and that's what we really want. It's not perfect. It needs, there are certain things that have to be fixed on it. On the other hand, and the burden on the regulatory agency has been really enormous. But the advantages are not only do we have people doing trials differently that help patients, and of course over 50% are for cancer, but we have them for other diseases as well. But we have the interactions and the collaborations, the all hands on deck. That's what makes a difference. We're not doing this in isolation. So that is really an idea of how science and public policy and working together with the community, both the developer community, the FDA, and with the patient groups really made a difference, and it's something we're very proud of. 21st Century Cures, so that just passed, and we're obviously thrilled, and we're thrilled for lots of reasons. One of them is there's a huge amount of money for all diseases, but it also has a lot of public policy implications, particularly for cancer. So I mentioned the Office of Oncology, if I can find my notes, but I want to go through a few other parts that really don't. There's an innovation fund for FDA. Of course, FDA never gets enough money, but there was $500 million going to the FDA, so there are resources for it. There are precision medicine initiatives on it, brain. It has supporting young scientists, which is really important because keeping a workforce is incredibly important. Patient-focused drug development, the ability for patients to really work with the agency in a meaningful way is important. Biomarker qualification, accelerated approval for development plans, streamlined data review, approval of drugs for limited populations, for antibiotics, priority review for breakthrough, and many, many, many other things. So it really was the community coming together for resources, for regulatory changes, and the important thing is you can't actually believe everything you read because these decisions are really up to the regulatory agency. So the idea that real-world evidence or some of these advanced pathways can or should be used is really a regulatory decision. There's nothing in that legislation that forces the regulators to make decisions that lower efficacy bars. And I think that's really important because it's always benefit risk that's most important. And I'm really pleased about that. And I think that public policy, which we don't talk a lot about, and patient input and the idea of collaboration among all sectors is very, very important. And it's an area that is really going to get us there faster. I didn't mention it earlier in the slides, and I do want to spend a moment on this issue of the complexity of next-gen sequencing and assays and validation of these assays. Right now, it's a little bit of the Wild West, and I know I'm not going to make any friends in the academic community here, but validation is incredibly important, because if we are going to make informed decisions on treatment for patients, the idea that these work is really important. And we're not suggesting that you necessarily, every center has to have their own ID application, but some standards, some ability to understand that we're all operating from the same standards. And I will just say the CAP standard and the CLIA standard isn't enough. We're going to have to figure this out, because for the patient and for the companies, if the assay is wrong, the drug won't work, if it's giving you the wrong information. So this is something very, very important. But I'm very excited about where we're going. I'm very excited about the science, and I think that we have a lot to do, and we will only get there for two things. Number one is the patient is always first, and second of all, collaboration.